Andrew Klavan, host of The Andrew Klavan Show and Daily Wire, as well as author of A Woman Underground. All right, sir, did I miss anything?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I'm very hardcore about this, so I may go over the top here. But
let's go.
First, you are absolutely right that the separation of church and state appears nowhere in our Constitution. That is from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote. One of the people who kind of installed it in our law was Hugo Black, a Supreme Court justice who was also a Ku Klux Klansman, whose hatred of Catholics informed his decision. He was trying to shut down the Catholics because he hated Catholics and Jews and just about everybody else the Klan hated. So the reason I'm so hardcore about this is Ryan Walters is right, but he doesn't go far enough. He's right that the Bible is part of our history, but he should also add that our country would not exist as it does, not just with the Bible, but the religious beliefs that the Bible expresses. They fed into almost every aspect of the founding of our country. And though you can find some people who were deists among the founders, almost all of them were not just believers, but many of them were actual ministers. So that's the first thing. The other thing is this: the ACLU, by terrorizing people with lawsuits, by bringing lawsuits against schools that the school districts can't afford to fight, so they just back down. By doing that, they've managed to chase God out of the public square, especially in the teaching of children, which is essentially to say that God doesn't exist. It's like saying you can't teach gravity, you can't teach wind, you can't teach all these things because you can't see them, and therefore it's just a matter of opinion whether they exist. Yes, they still happen, and God is a real thing. You cannot really explain our moral conscience without God. You can't even explain our sense of being without God. All of these things, by the way, and the idea behind this was that science had kind of negated God, and that idea has become very, very old-fashioned. Everything that science is pointing to now is pointing to the fact that mind comes before matter, that there must have been a creator. All of these things are so important to discuss, even if you argue about them, and you certainly allow discussion and argument. But we've allowed God to be taken out of the public square, and by doing that, we've essentially ceded to the left the idea that God doesn't exist. Yeah. And it is comical, I know, you cannot help but laugh, that the same people who feel that it's banning books to take pornography out of school feels that it's perfectly fine to keep the Bible out of school. But it's also serious.
But Andrew,
without discussing this, we cannot get at reality.
Well, that's the problem. Is to the left, it's less about religion and more, I think, about the moral standard that comes with religion. This CNN anchor, Pamela Brown, anytime he made a good point, she would just quickly pivot, and she brought this up too. Roll this. That the judge rules that Louisiana ordered schools to display the Ten Commandments violates the First Amendment. It's like, yeah, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. We can't have that in public schools, Andrew.
No, of course, that, as he said, that is a radical judge. But also, I think we should take these cases back to the Supreme Court. It's only because the ACLU has terrorized schools, because the schools can't afford the lawsuits that the ACLU brings against them. I think we ought to make sure they can afford them. We ought to donate to them. We ought to make sure they have the legal means to take these cases back to the Supreme Court. They were wrongly decided. Our religious decisions out of the Supreme Court are an absolute mess. And there's no reason, Justice Antonin Scalia said, it is true that the government cannot choose among religions, but it can certainly choose whether there should be a God or not in our teaching and in our speaking in the public square. And all of this stuff, all of this gender confusion, it all comes out of the logic that follows from there being no God, and that logic does not hold. And so I'm really hardcore about this. I think we should fight this right back to the Supreme Court and see if we can get some of these decisions turned around.
Yeah, and I know with a 5.5-seat majority on the Supreme Court, you probably will get a favorable ruling on that. Real quick, I got about 30 seconds left. More schools. I mean, Oklahoma and West Virginia, I believe, were the only states that won all their counties red. You think we should see more of this?
I hope we see it all over the place. I hope we see it in every red state at least. And it's the kind of thing that has not been decided as completely as we think it has. I do not think the public agrees, and I do not think the courts will necessarily agree if we go through it again. The history was set, and then the ACLU bullied people into accepting it. I think we should bully back.
Well, Andrew Klavan, you're a wealth of knowledge, sir. Appreciate you joining us.